today.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations to you guys.
Yep, that's okay. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our seminar today. Before we get started, want to let folks know about next week. If you are around and able to join us, one of my dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Amy Stiffarm, is going to be talking to us about her work in maternal and child health in Indigenous communities. So if you get a chance, please join us next week. This week, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Damian Chase Begay, and I'm the director of the health department here in Missoula Public Health. And today is a topic and an issue that is timely and very near and dear to me at the moment, because it's something that Missoula Public Health has been working on diligently day after day for the last several months, and really in the big picture for many years. But we know that in our community and in our country, houselessness and urban camping are more prominent. People who maybe didn't know about urban camping are now being exposed to it. And what that's done is it's really put the role of public health in the limelight, and everybody has come and said, public health, what are you going to do? And I had to figure out the answer to that question. So I turned to these two intelligent, talented women, and they are going to talk to us today about what we do. So today's topic is public health response to urban camping and all of the regulatory complexities that go along with that. So please join me in welcoming Shannon, Therriault, and Jeanna Miller.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Damian. All right, my name is Shannon Therriault. I'm Director of Environmental Health. This is Jeanna Miller, Environmental Health Manager. And we're going to talk about kind of the regulatory complications, the complexities that are associated with urban camping. First of all, I love this picture. I love this picture of Missoula. I think that we all want to live in, or at least Missoula to be a beautiful place, clean, inviting place to live in, safe. At the same time, I think probably all of us have a lot of empathy for people who are experiencing houselessness and have a lot of heart about that and know that it's really difficult. So basically what we want is we want to take care of our city, take care of our people, take care of our environment, take care of our planet, because that's what allows us to exist. Environmental health, I first want to talk about environmental health in general. And so environmental health really is that connection between people and our environment. And so it is about looking at what things in the environment can potentially cause disease or cause harm to the public, and then what we could do about it. Specifically, environmental health looks at things like air quality and water quality, food safety or water safety in establishments, public establishments. We deal with wastewater and wells because specifically we're concerned about water quality, and we look at solid waste disposal, hazardous waste disposal, again, to protect our water resources. I love talking about regulatory authority. It's like I could do like many hours about this and put everybody to sleep, but what I'll do is I'll keep it at a high level. First of all, Montana's constitution is unique. It's unique in that it gives us all the right to a clean and healthful environment, and it's not just us, but it's also future generations. That is not common in state constitutions. And so that is also carried through in the laws. The state legislature creates laws that give us authority. And part of that authority is found in the powers and duties of local health boards. So a local health board is responsible, has to, shall, must, identify, prevent, and address conditions of public health importance. That's very broad. Through the abatement of public health nuisances, again, very broad. And do inspections and take other measures as allowed by law, but basically to protect public and environmental health. Health boards can also approve regulations. And so now after the 2021 legislature, those regulations also have to be approved by the local governing bodies, which is both the city council and the county commissioners. But they can, the ability for local boards of health to create regulations means that these regulations can be very community focused. They can be focused on what we are experiencing here in Missoula rather than what might be happening in the eastern part of the state. It also allows us to be flexible. We can change those rules, or the health board can change the rules when we need to. Then following up on that is, and so that's the Missoula City County Health Code. That's part of what so it's down here at the bottom, but part of what the health board creates is our city county health code, which has regulations specifically about wastewater, specifically about solid waste management, food safety, and actually 4 or 5 other things. And then there's the power and duty of the health officer, who we just heard from. And so Damien, as the health officer, shall make inspections for conditions of public health importance and issue written orders for compliance, for correction, destruction, and removal of the condition. That is also part of the health code, in that his powers are also given to the sanitarians, the environmental health specialists that deal with complaints. Okay, so now, Jeanna.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we get into some of the specifics about urban camping, I wanted to just touch upon basic sanitation principles. And these probably seem kind of forehead smacking obvious to a lot of people. But having sewer and septic systems, a way to manage wastewater so that we prevent contact with human waste, that's pretty foundational. These principles are the ones that increase our life expectancy and reduce our burden of disease. We advocate and have requirements for and review and permit systems that treat and deliver safe drinking water to folks. Solid waste or garbage management, collection and landfilling, and then disease prevention for societal congregate living spaces. So do you have a way to break the cycle of infection? Can you sanitize your surfaces? Do you have safe food storage and preparation practices? Do you have a place to wash your hands? Can everybody access a bathroom conveniently and regularly? These are things that environmental health regulations are in place to both ensure moving forward. So as we develop new subdivisions or new homes, or new businesses have a plan to operate, they need a permit or a license from environmental health. And these are the things that we're checking on. Environmental health regulations also account for what needs to happen when these foundations kind of break down, or things, get out of order, or we have unsanitary or unsafe conditions. So that might be your septic system has failed, or you've opened a business before you're ready and you don't have any of the basic equipment, or your staff aren't trained to properly tattoo people without increasing risk of infection. So across the board, these are just basic principles that we're looking for. But what happens when we have a significant number of our population or of our community members who don't have access to those systems? Here in Missoula, even 10 or 20 years ago, some of the conditions we're seeing now just really weren't part of our day-to-day lives, and now they are. In fact, we kind of wrestled with if we should use our local photos. The photos in the presentation of our local encampments, and of course, we talked about privacy and empathy, and we're not showing these photos to kind of coldly put on display what's going on in our community, but the pictures certainly are worth 1,000 words. We couldn't just describe to you some of the issues that we're dealing with or some of the complaints that we're responding to. We really wanted to show you. So of course, if you live in a tent, you can't really guarantee that you have access to a bathroom that's uninterrupted, or that it's close enough, or that you're even going to make that a priority when you don't have your basic needs met. You might not have access to safe drinking water, certainly not running safe drinking water, and buying drinking water can be expensive and it might be out of your reach. The garbage can, even if it's a public garbage can, might be pretty far away. And if there is a close garbage can here in Missoula, we have privatized garbage service. And so the garbage might be owned by somebody else, and it's actually theft to use somebody else's garbage can. It's very expensive to take your own trash to the landfill. It's like $35 to get through the gate. So there are some real barriers to those, what the majority of us consider basic foundational sanitation principles that are just there. We wake up and we turn the tap on, or we can flush the toilet. We have a saying that if you don't hear about us, it's because we're doing our job, you know, behind the scenes, kind of setting it up so that everyone can be successful. RVs, similarly, we've got a lot of folks living in RVs. I'm sure that everyone watching this presentation probably has some personal experience or observation in their community with this kind of living situation, but RVs present their kind of own challenges, and not just for environmental health. You'll hear us today talk a lot about our lens and our focus and the role that we play in these kinds of responses, but RV encampments are difficult for other agencies as well because it can be a significant right-of-way obstruction or a fire risk. You can see that the picture here on the right, one of those RVs burned down. So RVs, there's a lot of stuff. People can have a lot of personal belongings, and a lot of times it ends up spilling outside the RV. Additionally, if you're unsheltered or maybe in a tent, you have to find a bathroom or use the great outdoors. A lot of times in RVs, people have access to a bathroom within the vehicle or within the trailer. Generally, RVs have a gray water and a black water tank, and those are self-contained and they're sealed. So it sounds all ideal, right? Not really, because they get damaged, especially in our weather. With freezing and thawing, they'll crack, or they have a missing cap, or they tried to tow the RV to a place that had rough terrain and it broke the tank. Those tanks are really expensive. So it's not as simple as showing up and saying, we got a complaint and your tank is leaking and you have to replace it. And that's about $380, or you have to quick tow it somewhere and get that tank dumped. Those things just are out of reach. And of course we recognize that, but we're still left with sewage on the ground. And so that's kind of the reality. Additionally, as you would imagine, some of these aren't as mobile as they originally were when they came off the RV factory line. Is that a thing? I don't know. RV factory line. So, you know, you might have an RV, but you can't move it. And so if you're still out of necessity using your wastewater tank, but you can't move it to a dump site, things that you would imagine happen. So we have some illegal dumping, or, you know, sometimes it's into our stormwater structures or our water bodies, or you just end up with overflowing tanks that then are a risk to the people in and near the camper or the recreational vehicle. And then the kind of the last one I'll talk about with these type of photos is food preparation. And you might not think about that as often, but of course, having refrigerated food and cooking food to the right temperature and having clean running water to wash your hands and wash your dishes is pretty foundational. Having cleanable, smooth surfaces to where you can break that cycle of bacteria and viruses. Those are things a lot of us take for granted. Those are things that we inspect for in restaurants when folks are serving food to a lot of people. But this is fairly representative of some of the food storage and preparation that we see among our urban campers. So they just don't really have the ability to prepare safe food. Preparing safe food is pretty hard. Even within our own homes, we get ourselves sick, or our families or our friends. It's particularly hard when you're cooking for a whole lot of people. And while we don't get a lot of complaints from the citizens who call up and say, hey, we're really worried that these folks don't have access to safe food sanitation, because that's just really not where people's minds go. It's certainly something that we're considering when we're evaluating risk of an entire encampment, or when we get a complaint and we kind of need to see what's going on in there. And then of course, in this particular population, a lot of times these encampments are pretty close knit. There's a lot of sharing of food. So the risk is sort of compounded. You have unsafe food and, you know, improper temperatures and cross-contamination of various foods. You share that food, so, you know, the risk is increased. And then if one person gets a foodborne illness, that oftentimes is transmitted by the fecal oral route, which is, you know, pretty hard to break the cycle of that type of transmission if you can't wash your hands and disinfect your surfaces. So food preparation is definitely within our wheelhouse and consideration, not just in our restaurants.
So the next thing that we want to talk about is just how we go about dealing with complaints that we get, how we go about trying to get compliance. And so I'm going to talk about it in a very general way before Jeanna takes us back to how we do it, how we deal with urban camping complaints. So we have the rules we have the authority, we have the responsibility, and then you've seen some of the concerns that come with urban camping. So how it works in other situations is first, we typically get a complaint. So we're complaint driven. That's very common in government, that when you get a complaint, you go out and you deal with that. So then we investigate, we try to make a connection. The best thing we can do is talk to somebody and get somebody talking to us. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage or cajole or try to somehow get people to take an action that we don't necessarily want to take. Pretty much we don't go to a place and say, hey, this is a problem, and we're hoping that you take care of it, and they'll be like, okay, we can do that, and then they do that right away. So that rarely happens. So when we aren't able to just get somebody to deal with the issue right away, we can kind of take it up a step and issue a notice of violation. That's a strongly worded letter, more formal, and it lets people know what the consequences are. And then if people have the option of doing an administrative hearing with the health officer, it might go to the Board of Health. And then we might enter into a compliance agreement with somebody to give people time to do what they need to do to clean things up. And on rare occasions, we have attorney letters. And so the attorney might get a different level of cooperation from somebody, or it might catch their attention differently, is really what it's about. Or even rare occasions we go to court. So all of these rules do have fines associated with them. In fact, some of them have potential jail time associated with them, but that is not what typically gets compliance. The threat of it,
like at least
the threat of it might get compliance, but so that's what we do. We try to use all the tools in our toolbox to be able to convince somebody to take an action, to clean something up, to come into compliance with the rules. So all of this might be happening behind the scenes with no visible change on the property. In fact, things might be even getting worse on the property. And so we hear things like, why is the health department allowing this to be like this? I promise you, we do not allow it ever. We do not ever tell somebody, it's okay for you to have your property, it's okay to pile up garbage, or it's okay, literally, this is a pipe that's going into a creek that is the wastewater for my house. We do not tell people that's okay, but sometimes it takes a while to get movement and to get things cleaned up. Also, we hear the health department isn't doing anything. But as you can see, we are doing perhaps a lot of stuff behind the scene. It's just not changing on the property. People think that we have more ability to kind of enforce, because they might think about what we can do for closing a restaurant. A restaurant that has sewage backing up, we can close them to the public until that gets fixed, or we can revoke a certification. But in the cases of solid waste or wastewater on property, we just don't have that same leverage. It's like we can't close the property. What would that do? The public's not coming on the property anyway. So the other thing that we do not do is we don't go to the property and clean it up. We don't go and remove the pipe. We might order them not to use it until there's a solution, but we don't go in and do that. A couple of reasons. One is resources. We don't have those resources. We haven't been given those resources. But the other thing is that private property laws in Montana are strong. We cannot just enter onto somebody's property and take their stuff, some of it which they might see as precious, without permission from them or an order from the courts. You just can't do that. And then the third thing is that with private property rights also come property owner responsibility. And in fact, when we're dealing with things like the situations that you see here, we're often dealing directly with the property owner, even if it was a tenant that was the one that was causing the problem or creating the garbage, because they have that responsibility. And sometimes it feels pretty unfair that somebody might leave a refrigerator or a couch on your property, and then you as the property owner have to take care of it. The same is true if it's public property. So if somebody dumps things on Forest Service property or leaves things in the right of way for the city or county, then it becomes their responsibility to clean it up. So that's part of what we do when we're looking at how to get compliance when we're dealing with our kind of regular complaints.
So let's talk about urban camping complaints and how they're different. They are so different. And of course, the health department, amongst other things, gets a lot of complaints. We're certainly not the only agency getting complaints, and we're not the clearinghouse for complaints or, deciding how collective resources are used. But with the increase of number of folks living unsheltered in our public spaces, there's a commensurate increase in complaints. And we get complaints from residences and business owners and other public agencies and partners and stakeholders. They come to us in all manner of ways. This top complaint is a very wide ranging, broad complaint. It actually came to us because somebody locally complained to the Department of Environmental Quality, the state agency, and said the Missoula Health Department is allowing hundreds of homeless people to camp by the river, and can you order them to clean that up? So that's so broad, it's not even really investigatable or actionable. We can't even really evaluate that. Also, we're aware. And then we get ultra specific complaints where people might say something like, I see people living in tents under the old library overhang. There's 2 tents there, and I know they don't have access to a bathroom when the new library is closed. So what are you going to do about that? And of course, as Shannon previously described, our typical approach or response to complaints just doesn't work very well. And that was really, it was kind of trying for us. We had to figure out what our role was and how we could make a positive impact and identify those things that really had to be cleaned up right away, even though using the tools at our disposal, like persuading people or appealing to their sense of fairness or explaining the science or the public health reasons behind what we're asking them to do, even if it costs a lot of money, or taking action against a license, or through Damien's authority, issuing orders to a private property owner that has a lot of skin in the game. They own that property and they see the authority that the health department has. It just doesn't motivate people who are living without basic needs. We understand that. So we could go through everything in our toolbox and use a whole bunch of staff time and try all of these things, and what is the outcome? We don't want to waste our time, and we want to have that positive impact. We want to be part of these solutions. Our traditional approach isn't often realistic either. So we can easily identify what compliance looks like. We know when people don't have access to a bathroom, that it doesn't mean they stop needing to use a bathroom. And we know that when people are living and generating waste and they don't have access to a trash can, that they're not complying with Regulation 3. We know that. But we also know that could be out of reach. And in a lot of cases, this is out of reach. So if we ask somebody to fix your wastewater tank for $300 and you've got to take about 2 loads of this to the landfill, and that's going to be another $100 plus gas, and you got to find somebody with a car, that is so beyond thinking about the next 24 hours and some basic survival type stuff, that our message, we're kind of dead in the water in a lot of cases. We do go and try, if we can make that personal connection, actually we're pretty effective. If there's somebody there that might have, their current reality this week is that they have somebody with a truck who might be able to help them out, and, they have some income, or, we still try those things, but we also recognize that is not, in the majority of cases, going to be very helpful or, impactful, I suppose. We also recognize that our typical approach is not often equitable. For a long time, I think a lot of agencies in government, and we're changing, and that's cool, and we're learning, that rules are rules and fair is fair, and what's good for this neighbor is good for this neighbor. But we know these are some of our most vulnerable community members. And if we approach these regulations from black and white, and we know what compliance looks like, and you're either going to do it, or we'll step through that administrative enforcement process, and we do have some penalties and fines, and we know that you're the generator of the trash, that approach would probably contribute to some of the inequities that we're facing right now because of some of those approaches and other systemic factors that that we're learning more about every day. So it comes down to an evaluation of the environmental health and public health risk, but we understand the context under which we're working. The one other thing I wanted to note here is that there's a whole lot of coordination with other agencies going on. So, I mentioned we're not the only agency getting complaints. We might respond to a complaint along with city parks and law enforcement and city streets. And we all have a little bit of a different goal. It's never the health department's goal to dictate where somebody can and can't live, but we want to make sure that those basics are met, at least to the degree that they can be basics. I mean, sanitation principles. Meanwhile, city streets might be there to say you have to move this at least 25 feet out of the right of way. You're blocking this parking or whatever it might be. The fire department might say, show up and say, this is a recipe for disaster. You cannot cook this way under that fabric awning. You're going to burn this down and you're next to other people's campers. Or city parks might say that we've gotten a lot of threats of violent behavior. So we're here with law enforcement and the illegal drug activity is causing this to be an unsafe place for kids to run through or whatever it might be. So we are coordinated in our response to these complaints, but our role is our role. So we don't show up and carry the torch for any other agency and say, this is not the right place for you to be, or this is a right-of-way obstruction, you got to move. So we definitely try to stay in lockstep. In fact, after 2 years of sort of trying different things and wrestling with the process while the complaints were really ramping up and coming in, our coordination with the city, in particular, city parks and the city of Missoula and law enforcement, has kind of resulted in them taking the lead. They can evaluate those sanitation principles and foundations. You don't have to be an environmental health specialist to know that contact with human waste is not safe and it, could be a risk factor for disease. You don't have to know that used needles that somebody could walk through and step on, it has a risk associated. So when they have some SOPs to accomplish the goals that the city is looking for, or the goals that the law enforcement agencies are hoping to achieve, and they'll look at public health and sanitation. Are these people near a bathroom or not, or what's the potential impact, and then they'll move forward. We certainly are still asked to evaluate certain aspects or certain encampments, and we're happy to do that. But the truth is, it's kind of built into some other agencies' processes as well. Part of that is probably because at the end of the day, that's the property owner. Yeah. It might be the Forest Service, and it might be DNRC, or it could be the city or the county, and it could be Public Works, or it could be parks, or parks, trails, and open lands if we're in the county. But like Shannon said, because we don't clean it up, and because we're not going to find somebody who we know has no resources to invest $1,200 into this particular cleanup or whatever it might be, the owner of that property is responsible for the solution. And so that, I think some of these agencies have kind of accepted that and built that into their processes. All right, we'll just talk a little bit about sheltering and some of the authorized campsites. So of course, sheltering has been part of the response or solution to houselessness for a very long time. That's, it's a safer place for folks to be. They can access services that will hopefully improve some of the conditions in their lives. They also ideally have an environment surrounding them at a shelter or an authorized campsite that is conducive to being healthy. Those environmental health basics are in place. Again, environmental health has a role, both when folks are planning an authorized site or a new shelter space. We evaluate that. We want to know about the building. We want to know about the surfaces and the water and the wastewater, and how many people are going to be here, and where are the bathrooms, and how do folks wash their hands, all those kinds of things. So we'll participate in that way in the planning aspect. We also address issues when they arise in an existing facility. So these are all local sheltering or authorized camp efforts. This is a big part of the conversation right now, of course, and part of that, some of you may be familiar with Martin v. Boise, which is a circuit court decision that in essence says agencies, cities in particular, can't enforce or enact rules that prohibit camping in public spaces if you don't have shelter capacity for those folks to go. There really is no alternative. You can't criminalize that. And so in some ways that has led to an increased spotlight on our shelter capacity here in Missoula. So no one's going to be surprised to hear, I'm imagining, that finding an ideal shelter location or structure is not a possibility. You know, nobody's just offering a bunch of money and land right next to where they might live or work or play for this type of operation. And that makes environmental health basics kind of challenging from the get-go. And a great example is the Johnson Street facility that you may be familiar with. When the city determined that that was the best, only really solution for a long-term but temporary a solution to our kind of dearth of shelter beds in the community, environmental health stepped in and said, talk to us about those plans. How many people are going to be there? Where are your bathrooms? People have to have access to the bathroom if this is going to continue in this way. So as part of that, they realized they couldn't meet the health code. So we went through a very long public process to ask the applicant, which is the city and the Poverello in partnership, what's your plan? They recognize that they need to improve that old failing building. It's on a septic system that's not adequate at all. And they have to provide basic sanitation, flush toilets. Of course, construction timelines and weather and funding, because it's really hard to get funding and then it's really hard to get it approved for that specific purpose in a public setting, kind of got in the way to the point where they said, can we just use chemical toilets in the interim? And we evaluate that not by just sitting up in our offices alone and saying yes or no, but we talk about it with the health board and we ask for public input and public comment. And we discuss the things that we have seen in previous winters at the Johnson Street facility. And we ask them for a plan about how they're going to manage that. So getting basics in place, recognizing again that it's not ideal, and if this were a brand new facility, it wouldn't even be on the table. We're just trying to be flexible to meet a whole bunch of needs in our community. Okay, this is overwhelming. This is our last slide. It's our summary slide, but you don't have to read all those. But these are headlines from 4 of our local media outlets in the last 6 months. And, you know, it doesn't tell a very congruent story, but, you know, reading through these, I do think paints a picture that this is a community wrestling with a crisis. There's all kinds of interests and pushes and pulls. You know, we're examining the factors that got us here in the first place, and we're trying to find both temporary and long-term solutions that will help out everyone, all of our community members, whether they're sheltered or unsheltered. And environmental health has a role to play in that, and that really is to ensure that, to the degree possible, everyone has access to basic sanitation.
Yeah, and as part of that, you know, we continue to apply that public health lens or that environmental health lens as to what will work. And so, for instance, one of the pictures that was shown in the last slide was a picture of the authorized camping site. And the authorized camping site was something that actually did go through like campground regulations to make sure that they were going to have the sanitation that was necessary for people that were there. There were a lot of reasons that authorized camping site didn't work. And one of them actually had to do with a variance from the regulations, which was they asked not to have to provide potable water, which is allowable. If you think about some of the campgrounds that you've been in, you know, Montana, they don't always have water. You just have to have a sign not to have potable water. But that's different when somebody is going camping for a weekend or even a week and they can bring their own water. Here and in a lot of places where the river is the closest water, that's not a good solution. And even though some of the solutions seem easy, the city council recently talked about, well, what if we have camps spread throughout the city and we'll put porta potties there and we'll put needles, you know, sharp containers there, and we'll put porta potties there and garbage cans there, that there's requirements then, if the city is starting to take responsibility for it, for there to also be kind of a manager, supervision, somebody who's there that can solve problems, and somebody who can spend money when the toilets are overflowing or the garbage is overflowing or, you know, something else is happening there. And that makes it harder. So even simple solutions, when you take a look at kind of it in its complex world, in the complex world, have a lot of complexity. So yeah. All right. Well, that is our presentation on environmental health. moving really fast.
That's how fast we go.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, there's still questions and answers, so.
Yeah.
Well, this is just a comment. I just really appreciate your bravery in talking about this really tough issue and coming out and just acknowledging how difficult it is. So thank you for talking to us about it and taking such sensible approach to what seems like an intractable problem.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Appreciate it.
We
Good to
miss
see
you.
you guys.
Yeah.
So just as a logistical thing, for anyone online, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, if you can put them in the chat, that would be ideal. And I can read those for our presenters. Looks like we have a comment from Rosemary Cree Medicine. Her comment is rent prices are one of the reasons for homelessness. This is all over, not just Missoula. I've taken a couple trips to Oregon. The camps along the highway freeway are crazy. So that's just a comment that she has. But if anyone else has questions specifically on this topic, if you want to put those in the chat, we can certainly read those. And we do have probably about 10 minutes if there are that many questions to go through.
And I will say something else, that when Jeanna was talking, a lot of times people are looking for somebody to solve the problem, but the problem might not be an environmental health problem. So the library example that Jeanna put up, I think that people wanted the campers to not be there because they felt threatened by them there because of what else was going on in the old library. But when we went and we didn't see any wastewater issues, any human waste issues, or any garbage issues, environmental health was out, right? It's that wasn't, so sometimes, even though we are cooperating with our other partners, they might want us to do things that we're not actually able to accomplish when we have the environmental health lens of our rules. Yeah.
So we have some questions coming in. Kimberly asked, can you share some of the lessons you have learned over the past 2 years around this issue? Lessons learned?
Oh my gosh, there's so many.
There are so many. And one of it really, I think one of the most powerful lessons is what our role is, especially urban camping within the city limits. And so for a while, the city really wanted us to go and evaluate a place and to have a letter that said, here are all the public health risks. I can tell you that the public health risks often looked very similar. And that's what Jeanna was saying earlier when she said that we don't even need to be part of that anymore. It's if there's garbage on city property, clean it up. If there's human waste on city property, clean it up. Part of that is the city then moving people, saying, okay, you can't stay in this camp anymore. We're giving you 48 hours or often 1 week notice that you have to move. And that is so that it doesn't become entrenched and so that they can go in and clean it up. It will probably happen somewhere else. We recognize that that's hard for the houseless individuals to have to keep moving. And at the same time, the city has a responsibility as the property owner in many of these cases, or as the park operator, to make sure that those facilities are available to all Missoulians and that they are not, that they don't become a waste dump or a toilet, honestly. So
I think another lesson that we continue to learn, but has become very apparent here, is that relationships are so important on every level. So to be able to stand up here and talk about this very complex issue through an environmental health lens, I think means that we have to be excellent relationally, really. I mean, we have to be able to go to the commissioners and the council and talk to them about the realities of the regulations and what our role is. And we have to coordinate with law enforcement. And we have to have the skills to talk to folks in the homeless community about options and bare minimums. And I think that we are getting comfortable with where we have landed because we built a lot of trust. There's so much emotion surrounding this issue it's complex and it's weighty in a lot of ways, and we have to be able to pretty confidently know what we're talking about, and it both acknowledge those really emotional, complex hardships that folks are going through and hold that line at the same time.
And recognize that environmental health is a piece of public health. And so, Damien as health officer participates in groups that are looking at how do we address the inequity issues that people who experience houselessness are facing. So we're just a portion of even the public health response.
So we have several more coming in. This is all good. Great, thank you, by the way. Question or looking for comment from Mark. How about deputizing some unhoused to be responsible persons to oversee camp operations? So that's a suggestion for your consideration or comment.
I don't think we really have a role in saying who is in charge of a camp, but we have a role in letting that person know what the requirements are and what the responsibilities are if you are in charge. So I don't know that it matters to us whether it's, a city personnel or somebody who is living in the camp. In fact, that's something that happens in trailer courts, is that the trailer court also has to have a manager, and it might be somebody who's living there, but it has to be somebody who can take action, who can spend money to fix a problem. And so, yeah.
Question from Seamus. As experts on the intersection between environmental and social issues, can you talk a bit about how we might better build coalitions across diverse mission statements, some of which focus narrowly on either environmental or social issues, which can make an organization hesitant to contribute to solutions for fear of mission drift or other reasons?
I don't know if I would confidently say I'm an expert in the intersection between environmental health and social issues. We're certainly learning more and more, but we are part of an awesome accredited health department. So we bring all of those minds to the table. We are definitely experts in environmental health issues, and we understand what the rules say and the nuances and the millions of shades of gray between compliance and who's responsible. But, Shannon mentioned one of the meetings that Damien attends where a lot of that thinking is happening and trying to ensure that folks who are working on the issue are pulling in the same direction rather than, investing a ton of time and money and effort for two very different or even similar outcomes and not kind of leveraging that common work.
I think it's also really about being open to hearing the other pieces of the conversation. So we want to just be there. We want to be part of it, and we want to say, and here's what the trailer court regulations and campground regulations say. And it's not just because regulations are regulations, it's because they are providing basic sanitation for people. It's like, and the other thing that's important that we've learned, going back to lessons learned, is that we have to stay open to change. And so just because we've always applied something in one way to a campground or in one way to garbage being on a riverbank, does not mean that that's the only solution. And so really being open to what possible solutions are is important. And I think it's important to us in environmental health that we stay open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question, but I don't want to be out of turn.
That's okay.
It seems like one area where there's a lot of responsibility across different players is with the children and with mandatory reporting. How's that all handled?
Well, I get to stay within my environmental health perspective. We do get complaints that, man, they touch upon 20 different issues. We have a complaint about an encampment and there was a fire there last week and there's illegal behavior and selling of drugs and there's dogs and they don't think the dogs are vaccinated and there's kids there and, the kids are being mistreated. And so what we do when we respond to that complaint is, of course, focus on sanitation and anything that might fall into the realm of one of the codes or regulations and try to figure out the way forward and the best person to talk to. But we always encourage people to talk to the people who can impact that. So, we would say, have you called law enforcement? Because whatever our response might be after we evaluate all of the specifics, it's not going to address drug sales. Or have you called CPS, or, you know, have you reached out to the folks that take care of that piece? And I think that we're getting more and more confident in our relationships with those other agencies, that we know, you know, who and where to direct folks when we have those multifaceted complaints. But yeah, we don't really have a role to play
So
when it
you're
comes to.
not mandatory reporters.
We are not.
Okay.
No.
No, but the other thing is that when we go out on a complaint, if they see something that they're concerned about, the sanitarian can, you know, probably most often we reach out to the homeless outreach team because they have that connection to resources. And then, so, yeah, or if it's you know, they feel like animals are being abused, of course, we're gonna turn around and tell, well, that's part of environmental health, but we'll tell animal control to, you know,
We do that
that we
too.
need a wellness check. And so there are, you know, we're,
Not totally silent.
right, yeah.
For the sake of time, I think we have 2 more questions that are in the queue, and we may have to end with those. Question from Gil: what professional concerns do you have, if any, regarding the Johnson Street facility?
Well, the reason that chemical toilets aren't allowed as permanent bathrooms is because chemical toilets have some real limitations. So just to back up, the Johnson Street facility complies with the health code with the exception of the fact that they had to get a variance. They don't have permanent bathrooms that are adequate to serve the folks at Johnson Street. So the limitations inherent to chemical toilets are they can overflow, and they are, you know, they take regular maintenance, and that's very expensive. So the prohibition on using chemical toilets to serve a structure really stems from the fact that, well, what do you do if the money runs out? Or what do you do if conditions that are in place in the beginning change and then nobody is available to maintain these? And so we as staff create a staff report and we present it to the health board and we make a recommendation. We recommended to approve that temporary variance because the operators of that facility had a really clear plan as to how they were going to prevent the conditions or the address the reasons why chemical toilets are typically prohibited. We wouldn't have just approved a variance request if they didn't have a really specific plan in place to address the reasons why we really don't like porta potties in the first place. The other thing at the Johnson Street shelters, they're able to show that they have funding to maintain those. A lot of times people want porta potties, but there's not evidence that the money will always be there to maintain them. They address that. And then finally, there's a responsible party. And so just because the health department approves a variance doesn't mean that we can approve a variance and then it all gets to fall apart on site and we turn a blind eye. We'll certainly be at that facility and take a look at operations. And so if it's not working, we know who to talk to because regulations require they have that supervision piece in place.
Okay. Last question, let me just read it. How do we declare homelessness as a public health crisis that is treated with the same urgency as wastewater at one campsite?
I think, I mean, that does go beyond, you know, the environmental health, probably traditional environmental health, but it is something that happened, right? So the mayor did declare homelessness or houselessness an emergency. There are groups that are working towards it, towards solutions. I know that you're not part of this presentation, but I don't know if you have something that you want to say, Damien, about that particular question.
I know that this is a topic, and I think Carrie acknowledged in the beginning that can be very, people passionately have contradicting views and ideas around this issue. And what I would say is that we have to be responsible in how we use both our authority, but also our role to draw attention to an issue and to address an issue in a way that we are not unfairly disadvantaging people just because they happen to be in a situation that doesn't look like what the situation looks like for our housed community. And so saying that someone, just by their existence and the way that they're existing, is needs to be addressed. I think we want to be really careful about that and thoughtful. It doesn't say that there are no conditions that need to be addressed. There absolutely are, but we want to do it in a way where we are not adding fuel to a political fire when public health's role is to protect health. And there are a lot of people out there who might disagree with me, and that's okay. But in my role as health officer, I see our job and our duty is to try to respond to the health of the public by working with our individual community members where they are at. And that's gonna look different.
And thank you. And I do think that the Johnson Street shelter came from that sense of emergency, that sense that something needed to be done immediately, even if it's not a good long-term or the long-term solution, I should say.
All right, we are out of time, so I thank you both for your time. Thank you for presenting, and we'll see everyone hopefully next week.
Thank
All
you.
right.
My goodness, could you imagine that you would be doing this work when you guys started in the field?